Our first story is, I'm a Yosemite Park ranger. Don't disrupt the mushrooms. People sometimes ask me what it's like being a park ranger. I have to admit it's a dream job for the most part. I work as a wilderness ranger, and that means I get to go out by myself, with little to no supervision. Wandering Yosemite National Park alone, I look for ways to restore nature to its proper state. I try to keep the park looking the way it's supposed to, pristine and beautiful, just the way it has been since long before humans were around to disrupt it. If you asked me what I was looking for, I would be hard-pressed to say it out loud. I just know it when I see it. The telltale signs of human activity, which indicate a camping party, has visited an area recently. People will often rearrange logs and rocks around a fire pit. They'll leave trash laying around, half-burnt sticks used for roasting marshmallows, and other signs of their presence will be scattered about. Hand-dug latrines, holes filled with cigarette butts, and all sorts of crude words and phrases carved into trees. I've seen things that make my eyes water, as a lover of nature and the untouched wilderness. My job is to correct their mistakes where possible, returning the wilderness to its natural form so that the next person to come along doesn't have to shed a tear at the sight of the forest, watching as it slowly deteriorates with each subsequent visit. I think my job is vital, and I'd hate to consider what this place might look like without people like me. But every once in a while, even someone as experienced as me can make a mistake. And that's exactly what happened to me. I made a terrible mistake. And now the wilderness I've always sought to protect has turned against me, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna get out of this alive. My uncle was the one who first told me about fairy rings. If you're ever walking through the forest and you stumble across a ring of mushrooms, and it looks too perfect, don't touch it, he said to me once. Those rings are made by fairies, and if you disturb them, they will come after you. You might have bad luck, or even worse, you could fall into their world and become trapped there. Uncle Bill had worked as a park ranger in his younger days, and he had lots of great stories about working at Yosemite National Park. Maybe that was partly why I wanted to get into this line of work. When I was younger, he told me and my older brother plenty of stories based in fact, but also quite a few that were based on folklore and legends, and some that he pulled straight out of his ass. Those were usually the best ones, and often it was hard to tell the truth from fiction, at least for me. As I got older, I learned that many of the stories my Uncle Bill told me were fantastical lies, but I never held that against him. He made the world into a wild, hilarious, and magical place for me from an early age. I remember he'd sing songs while playing his acoustic guitar around the campfire, making up the funniest lyrics I'd ever heard as he went along. To my young mind, it was like magic, even if he was just replacing the lyrics to Candyman with Candy Dog. To me, it was mind-blowing. Weird Al had nothing on my Uncle Bill, as far as I was concerned, and I'll never forget that feeling of walking through the forest with him, marveling as he explained the subtleties of nature, and believing in all the hidden things he explained to me, real or not. Of course, as an adult, I didn't believe in magical things anymore. Fairy rings weren't made by fairies. They occurred naturally. Although there were competing theories on how they came about, I had learned in college that it was a biological process. There's plenty of folklore around these odd-looking mushroom circles, but none of it is based in fact. Or at least, so I thought. But then, all that changed. Recently, I came across a ring of mushrooms in the forest, looking far too perfect and organized. In the back of my mind, I recalled the advice from my uncle, but I no longer took it seriously. I reminded myself that he'd always loved to tell me tales of magical, fantastical things. That didn't mean they were true, though. Once when I was a small child, we were out canoeing, and I was getting tired. And he had told me that if we just kept going, on this particular lake, there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken just up ahead. I had pretended not to believe him, but a little piece of 8-year-old me had been genuinely curious if we would find the Colonel and his secret blend of herbs and spices, located on a floating restaurant dock on the lake, just around the next bend. Even though I didn't believe this ring of mushrooms was made by fairies, I didn't want to disturb it. It looked beautiful and surreal, all the way out here in the middle of the forest, and I just stood and admired it for several long moments. A sound came from behind me, startling me, and I spun around to see a deer in the woods, just a little ways away. For some reason, I decided to take a picture of it and set my backpack down to take out my phone. I was looking down as I unzipped the bag, and when I looked back up again, I was shocked to see the deer was just a few feet away now, standing right in front of me. I backed up instinctively and felt the large mushrooms being crushed underfoot as I did so. The deer reared up on its hind legs for a second and turned around, disappearing into the trees again. My heart beating too fast, I looked down at the ring of mushrooms, now destroyed. What had been a complete circle was now a lazy arc with a mashed up pile of brown mush at one end. "Shit," I said out loud, looking down at the gunk on my boothiel. I scraped the mush off my shoe on a nearby rock, suddenly feeling nervous for reasons I couldn't understand. Why did I feel like I had broken some law, or like I had just grievously injured an innocent person? I hated disturbing nature in any way, hence my chosen profession, so I just chalked it up to feeling guilty over trampling the beautiful ring of mushrooms. Looking around the forest, I tried to ignore the feeling that now there were eyes watching me. Was Mother Nature silently judging me from all around? Or was that just my imagination? "Sorry, fairies," I muttered, picking up my backpack and moving on from the circle of mushrooms that was now a horseshoe of mushrooms and a brown splatter on one end. As I started moving again, I looked up to see a storm was rolling in. There wasn't one predicted, but the weather around this area could be random at times, and it wasn't the first time the meteorologists had been wrong. I figured I should start heading back toward the ranger station, so I turned around to go back the way I had come. There was no trail in this part of the forest. It was all navigated by landmarks and compass. I knew I had to head north and travel back up the slope, and eventually I would find my way to the top of a ridge. From there, I would make my way back down toward a hiking trail. The cliffs far off to the east would serve as a constant marker after that, once I was within sight of them. I knew the park so well I could picture it all in my mind's eye. Plenty of thick forest was in my way between here and there, but it was easy enough to navigate if you knew how to keep a steady line. I started walking, picking up the pace when I heard a rumble of thunder heading my way. The storm was moving in very quickly, and a cold breeze rushed through my hair and chilled the back of my neck, as if to confirm this. After 15 minutes of walking steadily uphill, the wind was picking up even further, causing branches to come crashing down from trees. The towering wooden columns stood swaying violently all around me, making me feel very nervous that something could fall on me from above. Weirdly, the ground began to slope downwards. This didn't seem right, so I paused for a second to check my compass, but it was missing from its usual spot where I attached it to my belt. Weird. It had been there only 20 minutes prior. Reaching my other hand down to feel for my radio, I noticed with increasing panic that it was gone as well. My heart began to beat a little faster as I looked through my bag and all of my gear trying to find these two crucial pieces of equipment. I never left the ranger station without either one. At least my phone was still in my pocket. Although the reception out here was spotty, it gave me some reassurance in case of an emergency. I continued moving in what I thought was the right direction, hoping I was just remembering the landscape wrong. Maybe there was a valley before the ground sloped upwards again? I had been mistaken before about things like this, and usually I found the best course of action was just to go with my gut. The problem was my gut wasn't sure anymore. I knew this was the right way, but my eyes weren't matching my sense of direction. I checked the moss on a nearby tree and saw it confirmed my internal compass. Still feeling uneasy, I continued moving along, going deeper and deeper into this part of the forest, into what looked like a dark valley. As I walked, I began to see things that didn't make sense. Plants that I had never seen before. Mushrooms in various shades and colors, ranging from greens to reds, yellows and oranges. Even a few that were blue with yellow polka dots. I came upon 3 snowy white mushrooms that were so tall and broad they were as big as a child. They stood at waist height and swayed as I approached as if aware of my presence. I had never seen anything like them, and wondered if I had accidentally ingested some sort of hallucinogen when I stepped on that fairy ring. Or maybe you fell into their world. Another voice in my mind said, sounding like my Uncle Bill. No, it isn't possible, I muttered to myself. This isn't possible. The clouds above were turning black with approaching rain, and that chilly breeze came again, running cold fingers through my hair. I spun around at the sound of movement behind me. Terrified of what it could be, I reeled backwards, my eyes wide and my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. There was no one behind me, but something was different. The trees had moved. Several large firs were now blocking my way back completely, standing next to each other in a way that did not even remotely resemble the natural way in which trees grew. They were shoulder to shoulder, with no room for root growth or for light to come through. It occurred to me after several moments that there was only one thing that could have happened. The trees were moving. They were alive and they were surrounding me, cutting off my escape. I spun around and ducked away from the huge white swaying mushrooms, and they swiveled, their huge caps turning like heads to watch me go. My legs feeling like jelly, I began to run faster than I'd ever run before, racing through the forest, going deeper and deeper into this dark, uncanny valley. Birds called from the trees above, their songs unfamiliar and strange. I began to see flowers and other plants that seemed to be watching me as well, just like the mushrooms in the trees, and I realized the forest was keenly aware of my presence. The trees were allowing me through, making a path for me as if this was the way they wanted me to go. I didn't know where I was running to, just that I needed to get away from those moving trees and the mushrooms that seemed to be watching me. But things were only getting stranger as I moved deeper into the forest. Finally, the ground leveled out, and the trees parted completely to reveal a river inlet. Towering cliffs stood on either side of the water, going straight up more than 100 feet on both sides. There was a hollow half-log of driftwood floating on the water, looking to me very much like a raft. I turned around to see the trees had closed in, blocking my exit. There was only one way to go, forward. Up above, the skies were swirling and black, and rain began to pour down, drenching me immediately as I climbed onto the log. I let my legs hang off either side and straddled it as the river began to swell. A few seconds later, I was drifting downstream on the buoyant log. It seemed like this whole area of the forest was one giant hive mind, and it was guiding me somewhere. As I drifted along the stream, the current picked up speed until it was a quickly rushing river. Rapids and whirlpools tossed me up and down and spun me around, sending the log tilting and tumbling over rocks and waterfalls. My legs scraped against rocks and were cut on their sharp edges, and several times I lost my grip on the slick wood in the rain and nearly went headlong into the rapids. The water began to calm slightly, and I looked up to see there were now caves dotting the cliffs, looking down on me from above. Black holes pockmarked the sheer vertical walls, like doorways into the unenterable homes of creatures that dwelled impossibly there. There was no discernible way to get up to those dark entrances to those caves, and yet I saw multiple red, glowing eyes looking out at me from each one. This forced my mind to imagine the type of creatures which could dwell in such a gravity-defying abode, and I imagined humanoid chameleons, giant lizard men who scaled the smooth, vertical walls of granite, climbing the stone as if they had suction cups attached to their hands and feet. Shuddering at this mental image, I just hoped those creatures weren't hungry, and that they wouldn't decide to come down to the river to greet me. Their glaring eyes watched me as I drifted along, and I was so distracted by them that I didn't even notice the gravel shoreline coming up. Unprepared, my momentum threw me from the log, and I went tumbling into the rocky shore. I stood and looked up to see I was just outside a large cave. It stood before me ominously, and I heard strange noises coming from inside. This made me curious, and I found myself taking tentative steps into the cavern. As my eyes adjusted, I saw there were steps leading down, carved into the rock. The wet stone dripped with moisture, cold water landing on my head and my hands occasionally. It was still pouring outside, and it was nice to be out of the rain, although I was still more than a little frightened. "They'll want your eye," a voice said from the shadows, causing me to jump. "Who's there?" I yelped. "Just one will suffice. But if one is better than the other, you best give them that one, and not the other." I spun around at the sound, looking for the source of it. "Down here," it said, and I looked to see a small rabbit. Its eyes were red, its fur white, and albino. "What did you say? And how are you talking? You're a rabbit." I objected, as if this were the least sensible thing to happen to me all day. There's no time for this. The longer you stay here, the more you're going to lose. Don't ask questions. Just do as I tell you. The bunny was as insistent as it was cute. I was reminded a bit of the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. The comparison seemed very apt at this moment. I just hoped this rabbit could lead me out of here. Okay, I said. I'll trust you. Good, the rabbit said. Listen closely. You've desecrated a sacred place. The fairy ring. I tried to interrupt to say I hadn't meant to, but he shushed me and continued. It doesn't matter if you meant to or not. Those up ahead are the ones tasked with protecting this place. You must make it up to them, and there's only one way. I thought about his first words to me. My eyes. They want my eyes. No, just one eye. You can pick like I said, just so long as one isn't noticeably better than the other. I tried to protest again, but he was already hopping away. His little fuzzy white tail the last thing I saw before he disappeared into the shadows. Great, I said to myself when he was gone. Just an eye, that's all. I made my way down the stone steps and deeper into the darkness. Fire spouted from torches up ahead, leading me towards a raised platform where figures stood waiting for me. As I got closer, I saw what they were. Giant toads, each one as large as a Volkswagen Beetle. Their eyes were strange and faceted like mosquitoes, dark and reflective as polished jewels, and staring intently at me as I approached. Their glaring eyes lacked any emotion. It was like a panel of judges, I realized as I marched into the midst of them. They looked at me coldly for several long minutes, until I wondered if they were waiting for me to do something. They'll want your eye, I remembered the rabbit saying. But that was insane. I wasn't going to give these monsters my eye. For what? Stepping on a few mushrooms? I scoffed at them and turned around as if to leave, but found myself face to face with cold, wet stone. The cave had shrunk, and was now only this small room, just barely big enough for me, and these 5 enormous toads who stared at me with blank eyes. What do you want from me? I asked, raising my voice to ask again when they didn't respond. Finally, one of them did something different. It glanced down at the cold stone floor of the cavern, and I followed its gaze to see a sharp rock, like a broken piece of graphite. I found myself reaching down to pick it up. No, I can't, I said. But the longer we stood there, the more it became apparent that I would have to. The stink of the toads and the damp chill of the cave was becoming oppressive. If I wanted to leave, I would need to do what the rabbit said. Somehow, he had known. It was as if this was the way it was meant to be. Time passed. I debated and pleaded with them. I got down on my knees and cried, but they never blinked an eye. Finally, after what felt like hours inside that cave, I decided I had to do it. I realized there was no other way. My heart pounding with terror, I lifted the sharp stone to my left eye and watched as the toads began to nod their oversized heads, their wide mouths stretching into even wider grins. I dug the point of the stone into my eye socket and began to pry and twist, thrusting it deeper until my vision clouded with darkness and red. The pain was so bad I had to stop several times, and felt my knees buckling as I almost passed out from the agony. The slippery gore made it difficult to find purchase, but after several attempts I finally managed to leverage the eyeball from its socket. Twisting and digging, it came out the rest of the way, and fell, dangling from the tendon like a tether, swaying and spinning as it hung from my ruined face. One of the toads snapped out its tongue and grabbed hold of the eye, yanking it back towards itself and tearing the tendon in half in the process. The pain was terrible, somehow worse than anything yet. Gasping for breath, I dropped the blood-slick stone to the floor of the cavern, bending over at the waist and trying to keep my lunch down. I felt queasy and sick about what I had just done, a terrible feeling welling up inside of me that I was now broken and had just lost some essential part of myself. Like when you lose an adult tooth or sever a finger with a table saw, I was not going to get that eye back. It was gone forever, and was now being digested in the belly of a great mythological toad. I blinked my one remaining eye, and when I opened it again I was standing back in the forest, with my boot in a puddle of squashed mushrooms. The fairy ring. I was standing half inside and half outside of it. I took my foot out of the circle, feeling the warmth of blood running down my face from my missing eye. Looking up at the sky, I saw it was clear and blue with no indication of the storm I had witnessed earlier. There were no more dark clouds, no more crashes of thunder. It was as if the whole thing had been a daydream, if not for the fact that I was missing my eye. I had no doubt that it was necessary for me to leave that place, though. If I hadn't done what I did, that other world would not have let me leave. If not for that rabbit and his advice, I would never have escaped. I made my way back to the ranger station. This time, the hill sloped upward, just as expected. At the top, there was a ridge, with cliffs in the distance, guiding my way back home. When I got back to the ranger station, there was only one little problem. My boss acted like I didn't exist. At first, I thought he was upset with me for some reason. I tried to talk to him calmly, but eventually resorted to yelling and screaming in his face. Nothing I did seemed to make a difference. It was like I was invisible to him. My other co-workers and my friends and family, none of them could see me anymore either. I've gone to see everyone I know, and they all act like I'm a ghost. Like I never existed. My landlord moved my things out of my apartment and put new locks on the door. Ever since that trip to the fairy world, or whatever that place was, I'm invisible to everyone. I'm a ghost. I can still use my phone, at least until it gets shut off for non-payment, so I've been doing some research, on fairy rings in particular. From what I've learned, there are lots of legends and myths surrounding them, but one caught my attention. Some say that if you wander into a fairy ring, you will be transported to another world, and that you can only leave by giving up an eye to the guardians of that world. The guardians look like giant toads with the eyes of insects. Other legends say if you wander into a fairy ring, the magical creatures of the forest will trap you there, or make you disappear, so that no one can ever see you again. I think somehow I got the worst of both curses. I'm scared that this may never wear off. Whatever this spell is, it may be permanent. They'll want your eye, the rabbit had told me. Just one will suffice. But if one is better than the other, you'd best give them that one, and not the other. My left eye has always been a little worse, but I was so used to it I'd forgotten. It completely slipped my mind that my contact lens prescription was a little stronger on that side. I wonder if somehow the toads knew. I'm going back out to the forest to try to make another deal with them. I'll give them anything, even my other eye. I'd rather be blind than be invisible. You have no idea what this is like. It's worse than death. I just hope I can find my way back to the fairy world, and then back out of the forest again. I'm leaving now after typing this out. If you don't hear from me, you'll know where I am. I have a funny feeling that I'll be missing both my eyes pretty soon, but I'm okay with it. I have peace with nature, and nature has a piece of me. Wah. The end. Story 2. I'm a park ranger for a state park. Something is terribly off about the woods around here. Started working for Glenrock State Park 3 months ago. It was supposed to be an easy job. It's not some dangerous mountainous terrain filled with cougars and wolves, but a relatively flat expanse of deciduous forest. That's why I was surprised when, only a few days into the job, I got pulled out on a search and rescue mission. Again, this wasn't some dangerous terrain where lots of hikers went missing. I often saw young families with toddlers walking the mile trail to the waterfall. People would go for light jogs, have picnics and barbecues, bring their little ones to play in the stream. The surrounding towns were safe. The terrain was easy. The biggest threat we had was black bears, which, don't get me wrong, can be very dangerous, but still a far cry from cougars and cliffs and serial killers on the loose. Anyway, the missing person was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her name was Heather Ricks, and she had taken the red trail with her dog, a 3-mile loop into the forest. Again, like all the trails, it was an easy hike. It shouldn't have caused any problems for her, assuming she had no underlying health conditions. But she didn't come home. Her boyfriend had called the police, worried sick about her. He'd quickly ruled out all the other possibilities. She wasn't the type to up and leave. They'd had plans the next day. He hadn't heard from her by phone. No credit card activity. She disappeared without a trace. We began the search. 2 other park rangers came with me, Donnie, a young guy still working towards his degree, and Miranda, an older woman who'd been working here for years. We started off on the red trail together, scanning the woods for any sign of Heather. I knew we were in for a bad time when we found her dog. He was roaming around about a quarter of a mile off the trail, panting and exhausted. Donnie took him back to the ranger station to get him food and water. We searched the surrounding forest, kicking up leaves and scanning the bare trees, but there was no other sign of Heather. Miranda swore under her breath. Damn it. Not another one. Another one? Do people go missing here often? We've had some bear attacks, 3 in the last year. On that morbid note, we continued deeper into the woods. Around the halfway point, Miranda and I split up. She headed south, while I headed north. You got a compass, Mark? She asked when we started off. No, I have my phone. Reception cuts out sometimes. She dug in her bag and pulled out a compass. I got a spare. Take this one. I took it to be polite, but I didn't plan on using it. The park was only about a mile or 2 wide unless I found myself deep in a cave somewhere. I'd have reception at every point inside the park. We continued in our opposite directions. Eventually, I came to a stream. I followed it as I continued north, watching the black water roll over the rocks. The soft gurgling, splashing sound calmed me. It sounded just like those white noise machines that's supposed to help you fall asleep. I pulled my phone out, just to check that I was going in the right direction. And that's where things started getting weird. When I opened Google Maps, the map didn't show a stream next to me. Generally speaking, the map schematic, whenever I'd used it, would show a little blue line where rivers and streams were, even if they were relatively small. I switched over to satellite view a while. Same thing, there was no cut or break in the sea of trees to show that a stream was there. It was just pure forest stretching out in every direction. I guess the trees are tall enough to hide it. I walked over to the stream. The black water lapped over the rocks, glistening in the light filtering through the waves above. My own reflection steered back at me, distorted by the rippling water. I dipped my fingers in. The water felt slightly warmer than it should be, not by much. But here in November, I'd expected to feel ice cold. Instead, it was only cool. I shook my head and stood up. Then I continued further into the forest. Heather, I called out, scanning the trees. Heather, can you hear me? No reply. Just the birds chittering, the wind rustling the leaves. I lost sight of the stream as I continued north. And then, about 20 minutes later, I did find something of Heather's. My heart stopped when I saw it. A purple knitted hat lying on the forest floor. It was one of the items she'd been last seen with, according to her boyfriend. I had a whole list of things to look out for, things that might belong to her. I took a photo and texted Miranda and Donnie. When they didn't reply right away, I decided to head further into the forest. Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she needs my help. I continued forward, scanning the forest floor for her white puffer jacket, her pink sneakers, anything that stood out against the mass of brown before me. And then about 10 minutes later, I did see another flash of color. I ran towards it, heart pounding, and found her jacket on the ground. Except, there was something wrong with it. Her jacket was laid out perfectly on the ground. It wasn't bunched up or twisted or tangled, like you'd expect it to be if she'd gotten into a fight with an attacker. It was laid neatly across the leaves, without even a wrinkle, and it was zipped up. The cogs in my brain turned as I stared at it. That means someone zipped it up after it came off her, unless she took it off on purpose, zipped it up and lay it there to pick it up later. But that didn't make a lick of sense. It had been between 30 and 40 degrees all week, even at the warmest parts of the day. Nobody would voluntarily take off their jacket and leave it in the forest, which only meant one thing. Someone had left it here, on the ground, deliberately, for us to find. I lifted my gaze and scanned the trees, my heart pounding. The forest was silent, now too silent. I didn't hear the calls of birds or the rustling of leaves. It was just pure silence ringing in my ears. And then, Ding, ding, ding. I jumped about a foot in the air as my phone made a texting sound. Hands shaking, I pulled it out of my pocket. To see a text from Miranda. Go back to the ranger station immediately. As I glanced at the photo of the hat I'd sent her, I noticed it too had been laying perfectly across the ground. I quickly snapped a photo of the jacket and sent it over. I found her jacket, but it looks like it's been staged. 3 dots appeared, indicating Miranda was typing a reply. Then, get out of there now. Snap. Dot. The sound of a stick breaking. I glanced up and saw movement among the trees. I couldn't see anything. Between the crisscrossing trunks and overhanging leaves, just a flash of shadow. A flash of movement. I broke into a sprint. A few minutes later, I pulled out my phone to make sure I was going the right way. It took me longer than I would have liked, but finally, I made it back to the trail. Even though my lungs were burning and my legs were aching, I forced myself to sprint back down the trail. I didn't let myself stop until I was at the ranger station visitor center at the front of the park, panting wildly. Then I slipped inside and collapsed into a chair. Miranda was on the phone with someone. She eyed me as I came in, and then continued to the unknown caller. Yes, vacate immediately. Tell them it was another bear attack, and it isn't safe. A pause. Let me know when you're done. She hung the phone back up on the receiver and turned towards me. We're vacating the park. Can you set this up at the trailhead? She threw me a roll of yellow caution tape, then handed me a red sign that read closed. Okay. Donnie should be here any minute. When you see him, tell him to help you clear out the parking lot. Davis and Jackie are clearing out the trail, so they don't need any help there. I had a million questions, but I did as I was told. Donnie came back just as I was hanging up the sign, and the 2 of us cleared the parking lot. Less than an hour later, the park was empty. The gate was closed, and the 5 of us were holed up in the ranger station. Jackie, Davis, and Miranda seemed to know something we didn't. They talked in hushed tones in the back room with the door locked, which left Donnie and me sitting in the main room with nothing to do. She doesn't want us to leave, I said, tapping away at a stupid mobile game on my phone. Which is dumb because we're not doing anything here. Still getting paid though, Donnie replied. Isn't that a good thing? Yeah, I guess. An awkward silence settled between us. Donnie was about 10 years younger than me, I think, and I wasn't sure what I had in common with some Gen Z teenager. I racked my brain for something to talk about, but came up empty. She didn't tell you what was going on. I asked again. He shook his head. There's no way it's bears. I think it's some serial killer on the loose, he said. But they don't put that on the news because they don't want people to panic. I mean, laying down her clothes all nicely like that, luring you out somewhere. That's serial killer behavior for sure. Very helpful, Donnie, I thought sarcastically, but I kept my comments to myself. I stood up and walked over to the window. It was starting to get dark outside. The sky had turned an intense shade of deep blue in the throes of dusk. All the crepuscular animals had begun to stir, birds flitting back to their homes, deer moving about. I reached up to close the curtains. Something caught my eye. No dace. The caution tape I had so carefully strung across the trailhead had been torn in 2. The closed sign lay on the ground. I squinted, my heart beginning to pound. It had been fine 20 minutes ago, after we cleared the parking lot. Maybe it was just a deer. Maybe a deer tripped over it and ripped it with its hooves. But as I stood there, staring out into the darkness, I saw something else. A shape just at the tree line on the other side of the parking lot. It didn't move. I squinted, but in the darkness it could have been anything. An oddly shaped tree trunk, a fence post, a bush. Still, the way my eyes immediately snapped to it, I wondered if it wasn't there before, if it was someone standing there. I squinted. The door creaked open behind me. I turned around to see Miranda, Jackie, and Davis walking into the main room. Donnie stood up and began asking them about the bear attacks. I turned back to the window. My blood ran cold. The shape was no longer there. Those black bears are a lot more vicious than you think, Miranda was explaining to Donnie. Never get between a mother bear and her cubs. She'll tear you right to pieces. I had an uncle out in Fort Wayne. I closed the curtains, the metal rings screeching against the curtain rod. Then I turned back to the four of them, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm gonna head to the bathroom, Donnie interrupted, slipping past them. Be right back. You still pay us for bathroom time, right? Like the clock's still running? Miranda rolled her eyes. Yes, Donnie. He disappeared into the back of the building, which gave me the perfect time to confront them. Miranda glanced at me, then continued towards the door. Jackie and Davis followed her. Without so much as a goodbye, she reached for the doorknob. Wait. You can't go out there. I saw something in the woods. The three of them exchanged looks. Miranda took her hand off the doorknob and turned towards me. What did you see? There was someone standing there, just at the tree line, and the caution tape is down ripped in two. I glared at her. Are you going to tell me a bear did that? Or are you going to tell us what's really going on? She glanced between Jackie and Davis. Okay, fine. She sat down across from me and heaved a sigh. We think there's some sort of murderer on the loose. What? It only started happening a few months ago. This town, this park, they were always so safe. The worst incident we had in 5 years was somebody had their dog off their leash and it bit someone. We had nothing, no weirdos, no bear attacks, nothing. But then, 3 months ago, Emily Johnson went missing. She disappeared after she went for a jog on the Red Trail. It was all over the news, especially because she was a pretty blonde 20-something. Missing white woman syndrome and all that. People had all kinds of theories. That she was nabbed by some stalker or serial killer or whatever. We had volunteer search parties combing the woods, park rangers combing the forest, all of that. We even had people leaving flowers and teddy bears along the Red Trail where she disappeared. And that's when the next incident happened. Miranda hesitated, glancing at Jackie, then at Davis. One of these people, holding a vigil or whatever, disappeared. It was an older woman who'd known Emily as a student or something. She was just gone. No trace of her. We redoubled our search efforts, but we didn't find anything about her either. In the past 3 months, a total of 5 people have gone missing. All women. All from the Red Trail, never from any other trail. What? She grimaced. Then, one morning while out on patrol about a week after the second woman disappeared, Jackie found Emily's sneakers. And it was like your pictures of the hat and jacket. The shoes were placed next to each other, and the shoelaces were tied in neat little bows. It was obviously stained. That's horrible, I said. I can't even imagine. Well, it gets worse, Miranda replied, crossing her arms. A week later, we found Emily's necklace in the ranger station. We changed all the locks, of course, and we had the police out here several times. They didn't find anything. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced back towards the window, but it was now too dark to see across the parking lot. I stood up and pulled the old curtains over the window, then returned to my seat. Clearly this whole thing is a game to him, Jackie said. He enjoys seeing us afraid. I mean, if he had access to the ranger station at one point, he could have easily snuck up behind one of us and killed us. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted to scare us. Watch us squirm. Play with us like a cat plays with a mouse it's going to eat. Or trying to eat. But the police are looking for him, right? Do they have any leads? I asked. The police? Miranda shook her head. Well, they're useless, basically. I mean, they're investigating. They've ruled out some guys, but they haven't actually nailed down anyone. No suspects. At least, none that they've told us about. They keep telling us they're going to find him, but they never do. That's because it isn't a him, David interrupted. Miranda rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, not this again. There are a few things we've seen with the case that don't make sense with what a human would do. A few weeks ago, I saw this silhouette several hundred yards through the trees. I started chasing it, but it moved too fast. Even Usain Bolt couldn't run that fast. Davis. And there's also the howling. We hear it only at night, around midnight. It sounds like this horrible blend between a woman screaming and a dog howling. That's a northern screech owl, you idiot, Miranda snapped at him. And it disrupts the electromagnetic field. If it's anywhere in range, your cell phone will cut out. That's why I make sure to always have a compass on me and not rely on GPS. Wait. I glanced from Miranda to Davis. You gave me a compass. I don't believe him, she said, shaking her head. I just think a compass is more reliable than a phone. But she sounded slightly uncertain when she said it, like she didn't believe him, but also wasn't ruling out the possibility that there was some cryptid running wild in the woods. Look. Davis stood up and approached me, pulling out his phone. He flicked his fingers over the screen and then handed it to me. Look at that photo, he said. You can't tell me there's something seriously fucked up going on here. I looked down at the screen. It was a grainy photo of the forest, zoomed in as far as the camera could go. Between two birch trees, there was the sliver of a dark shape. It was incredibly tall, maybe about 8 or 9 feet. The problem was, because the resolution was so terrible, and it was mostly obscured by the trees, you really couldn't tell what it was. It could be anything from a tree trunk to some random debris to a weird compression artifact. Cool photo, I told him. I heard the howling noise at the same time, he replied, echoing through the forest. I thought you only heard the howling at night, Miranda snapped at him. Usually at night. Jackie's heard it in the day. Jackie shrank away, looking ashamed. Well, I did see something out there, I told Davis. It wasn't super tall, though. It looked like a person moving through the brush, wearing a light-colored shirt. That's the whole point, Davis replied. We're dealing with a skinwalker. This is its true form, in the photo. It can change shape to imitate people. So what you saw was probably the skinwalker in the shape of someone else. Okay. Now I could see why Miranda was so dismissive of Davis. He didn't think there was just something unexplainable in the woods. He thought it was specifically a shape-shifting skinwalker whose mere presence disrupted the electromagnetic fields around us, hiding out in this tiny state park in the middle of nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised if the next words out of his mouth were something like, I saw him getting donuts at the Latham Bagel Shop. We sat there in awkward silence. I tried to think of something that wouldn't totally offend Davis, but also not egg him on. The last thing I needed was for everyone at this job to think I was some cryptid-believing cook like he was. Can you go get Donnie? Miranda asked, turning towards me. It's been like 20 minutes. I guess so, I said, getting up. But as soon as I stepped out of the front room, I heard Miranda, Jackie, and Davis talking in hushed whispers. I lingered just outside the doorway for a moment and caught snatches of their conversation. Can't tell him that. Do you really think? I strained my ears. Hurry up, Mark. Reluctantly, I walked down the hallway, up the stairs to the small attic level, where the single bedroom and bathroom lay. Donnie? No answer. I walked right up to the bathroom door. Donnie, are you just playing on your phone? Silence. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I raised my fist and knocked on the door. It creaked open under my fist. My heart plummeted when I saw the lights were out. Donnie? I called, my voice shaking. You here? My fingers fumbled along the wall, looking for the light switch. Click. I froze. Donnie lay on the floor. His shirt was drenched in blood, spilling out onto the tiles, seeping into the crevices. His eyes were closed. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because soon Miranda, Jackie, and Davis were stomping up the stairs. They ran in behind me. The world turned into a blur of color and noise as they rushed to help him. But I just stood there, frozen, my legs shaking underneath me, because on the counter was Heather's purple hat, neatly folded next to the sink.